Hello there, good evening. Welcome to episode 9 of Nothing Else Mattress, the music podcast that sets out to try and establish what are the 100 greatest albums ever made. To do that, we're reviewing 5 albums on every podcast, and we are using the latest Rolling Stone list as a base list, and from there we are voting some in and out. We've reviewed 40 so far, and we have 23 voted in at the moment, 58% I think that is, so doing okay, but we've got a bit to go. So we've got another 5 to get through tonight. We've got a couple of friends on tonight. I was asked to give your full names out actually by someone, so I can introduce you or you can introduce yourself. I don't mind. George, introduce yourself.
George Paterson.
George Paterson. Do you want to do a bio on that, or?
Yes, George Paterson, super sexy bastard, author, writer, broadcaster, very tired, daddy daycare, lost to music, will return.
Hooray. Brilliant. Thanks, George. John.
Hi, John Welsh. So I'm another super sexy bastard, actually. Sometimes writer for Into Creative, and during the day I'm trying to help prop up the economy and keep the finance world going with varying degrees of success.
That means you're a banker, right?
Interest rates up today.
Nothing to do with me.
Do you get that? Do you get the song, John? John Welsh, you're a banker? Yeah.
All the time. Yeah, all the time.
Thought you might. Brian Davidson, semi-retired, semi-podcaster, semi-drunk.
Just a semi.
And just in semis as well, as Mrs. David probably testify. So we've been did the podcast last year, and obviously back doing them this year. We're missing Stephen McDead, who hopefully join us tonight, and also Lisa Semple. Lisa's on holiday at the moment in Greece, and she's hoping to put her votes in before she comes back again, because she doesn't like missing the vote. So, but we'll make a start. So, say we've got 5 to do tonight, and the first one on the list at number, what is that now, 59, isn't it, is Van Morrison, Astral Weeks. So we'll read off the list from Van, and we'll take it from there. So it says that Van introduced a type of music that had never been introduced before. It came from nowhere. It was a new genre, and in his words, I don't know where it came from. Belfast cowboy learns from the band, learns from other records at the time, big Dylan fan, and creates a message that appealed to not very many at the time, but over time what's the last word, sorry? The crowning touch, was a superior jazz quartet who recorded their basic backing tracks in one 3-hour session without any instruction from Morrison on what he wanted or what the lyrics meant. Okay, so that was the Rolling Stone review of Astral Weeks, which was number 60 on the list. So there's only 3 of us tonight, so I'd imagine we might rattle through. So I am going to ask John for his thoughts on this one, because I think he's a big fan. John.
You set me up. Aren't you? So, right, I guess it's like a lot of these, you go into it, you have to go in with a bit of a open mind, right? Now, before that, do I like Van Morrison? No, really. Brown Eyed Girl is, fair play to the guy. He's written one of the most successful songs of all time, but
it was never a hit. It wasn't even a hit.
Maybe not. But it's all, it's always on it. If you go to any type of party, it's on. It's on the radio station quite regular, and every time it comes on, I switch it off because I cannot stand the song. Right? I've never taken to Van Morrison for whatever reason, but I've never really listened to his music, to be fair. Okay. So perhaps it's more of a persona about him, and how he comes across. So that was my initial reaction to Van Morrison. So I was thinking I was going to hate this album when I listened to it. It's better than I thought it would be, but I do think it's quite patchy in bits. It's a bit hit and miss. I think there's probably about half the album I could listen to again. I think Astral Weeks itself is particularly powerful. Really, really strong vocal on it. Decent song. What else you got? Cypress Avenue, real bluesy feel about it. And you can see the Bruce Springsteen influence taken for that. I can imagine that's what he was listening to and going, I'm going to take the best bits of this and I'm going to turn it into my own sound. And I think that's what Springsteen's done. Madam George on side 2, about a 10-minute epic, and it is an epic, you know, and a song to keep the attention for 10 minutes, I think, you know, is a tough ask, but I think that he did pull that off there. And
so Madam George and Cypress Hill are kind of sister songs.
Cypress Hill are a
Cypress Hill.
yeah. So we're going back to the rap theme here.
We're back on rap again,
yeah.
They were big in '68, right?
Well,
Cypress Avenue, yeah. So there's a kind of there's a Belfast thing in there.
There is, and the album's very much influenced, I think, by his days in Belfast. So, but songs like Beside You, I mean, I listened to that twice, and it just annoyed the fuck out of me. It's, you know, it's got this flute thing going on, and it's awful.
Okay.
You know, it shouldn't
because
even
of the
appear
flute,
on a and just the whole song. You know, there's a bit of classical guitar going on in it. It's a bit redeeming, but you know, to the point that this wouldn't even be a C-side, never mind a B-side of a record, right? I did though, you know, when I was doing a bit of research into it, I was absolutely captivated by the story of the record and how it came to fruition. He's previously on, I think it's Bang Records, and the guy that was in charge of Bang Records died suddenly of a heart attack. And his wife blamed that solely on Van Morrison at the time.
She did.
And then just the story after that, you know, he got a new record deal. I think it was with Warner's, possibly, but he still had to give 3 songs a month to Bang Records, and he just fuck it. He made up 36 songs in the spot, which were just nonsense. I actually think some of them might be on this record, but that's just my view. He couldn't play in certain New York clubs because of fear, you know, that the mafia might, you know, or the underworld might be involved because through Bang Records and stuff like that. So, and she also tried to get him deported. As well, which I think, what, you know, really vindictive. But obviously, don't know her side of things, and that was unsuccessful because he married his American girlfriend, and that gave him the right to stay. And he then went on to, you know, settle down and then get a kind of mini band together, and you know, that was the genesis for these songs. So, so the actual story behind the album really got me a lot more than the record itself. As I say, I think, is it better than I was anticipating? Yes, it is. Is it an album that I would play again? No, it's not. I mean, I would go back and play probably 3 or 4 of the songs again. But I did find it quite patchy in bits. So
it was released in November '68, and he came from a relatively sort of pop garagey background with them, and then his first bunch of records, which he actually ended up getting an album released, I think, that he didn't know he was getting released because he'd recorded some songs and Bang Records just put it out, and there was a bit of a dispute on that. So this is his kind of, I suppose, his first proper record, if you could call it that, and it came from nowhere. So he's got this one in the top 100. He doesn't have anything else in the 100. He's got Moondance, I think, at 120, I think that was, on the original Rolling Stone list. And interestingly, some of the things that you just talked about are all quite relevant, that he wasn't particularly well known. He hadn't really been successful. As George said, he didn't really have any hits. That kind of came a bit later. And he also wasn't particularly well liked. So he didn't have a lot going for him at the time. And even allowing for that, plus the record label dispute, plus the deportation challenges, plus. So, you know, that kind of, in the face of adversity, this thing seemed to come out from nowhere, really. So it is kind of, you're right, the story's quite a fascinating one.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, some of the records we've reviewed so far, the quite often they're quite poorly received at the time they're released, as this was.
Yeah, it was.
And then, you know, they seemed to grow, you know, there was no real promotion behind this record, etc. So poorly received, or was it even received because there's no promotion? Who knows? But quite a lot of the records that we have talked about go on to, through whatever means, establish themselves as a iconic album, you know, through time. So, you know, and I'm sure there'll be some still to come that we've not discussed. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I guess this one would fall into that bracket.
Okay, we'll come back to that when we do the whiz round on the vote. Thanks for that, John. George, what's your take, mate?
It's an album that I had many years ago, and I hadn't listened to. Like a number of these albums, I hadn't listened to it for a long time. So it was good to get back to it and revisit Astro Weeks. And I quite enjoyed it. Listening to it again after maybe a couple of decades of not listening to it. It's, I feel quite a strong statement album from Van Morrison after his them experience and then his Bang Records experience that John's talked about there. But things like Brown Eyed Girl always blew me away that everyone knows the song, but it was never a hit record.
Yeah,
it was a staple of you know pop radio, but it was never a hit. But it's one of those albums from that era, a classic alongside Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper. Pet Sounds came in '66, Sgt. Pepper '67, and Astro Weeks in '68. And all three of those works stand very unique, incredibly fresh, inventive pieces of work that all hark back to the youth and the childhood of the writers. And I always found that fascinating, that he was writing this absolutely beautiful, sometimes pastoral music about Belfast, of all places, and he turned Belfast into this sort of magical, mystical place. I really enjoyed listening back to it. You know, the free-form acoustic groove of the title track is a sleepy, half-dreamt voyage through the slipstream. I loved the title track, Astro Weeks. I love just how it rambles on and just finds its own groove. All of the tracks really stand out for me. It's a cracking album. Is it my favourite Van album? No, I think Moondance still tops it.
Interesting.
I still prefer the songs on Moondance. But I like
bit more polished Moondance, a bit more structured, a bit more song orientated, I think, than
and that
feel.
probably works me rather than just this.
This is like a feel, isn't it?
It's very jazzy, this one, but I feel the way Young Lovers Do sort of hints at where he's going next. That sort of brassy, jazzy arrangement, and people fucking hated that song. People who love Astro Weeks, you know, the people like Grail Marcus and some other guys from the Rolling Stone think they called it was like spumante at a champagne buffet. So it just stood out like a sore thumb. I really like this song. I think it's a great pop song.
I quite like spumante.
Yes, but it was incredibly influential. You were talking, John, about Springsteen. Springsteen and Steve Van Zandt said that this was the album they listened to, you know, like on repeat. It was like their Bible for a while. And Martin Scorsese said that the first 15 minutes of Taxi Driver is based on Astro Weeks.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, I'd never heard that before.
No, I didn't know that either.
Through that today, I was like, wow, incredible. But for me, yeah, it's one of those standalone documents of its time, and I think it stands up really well as an album. I don't think, you know, you would have bands like the Waterboys without people like Van Morrison. I think this album particularly sort of drew the roadmap.
So sorry,
sweet,
John.
Sweet Thing Sweet Thing.
Yeah.
Was covered by the Waterboys and Fisherman's Blues.
Yeah, there's a clear line between the bands. That sort of up between the band and the Waterboys. There's definite cross-pollination there.
And I was just about to say that was my jumping off point. I had heard Van Morrison before, but as George said, it was a bit of sort of singles here and there. But Fisherman Blues, Sweet Thing was my reason to go back and listen to Van Morrison. And National Weeks was the record I went back to, which I turned out to love as well. There's also a great cover that I found on one of the Waterboys live albums of The Healing Has Begun. I think it's from Glastonbury in 85 or 86 or something, and they do it for like 10 minutes, and it's mixed into one of their other songs from their second album. And again, I went back and checked that song out. So yeah, you're right about the Waterboys. I think they were definitely massively influenced and also quite important as for me to sort of get into Van. I guess a couple other things about where he is with it all. So talked about the backstory, it was difficult. Talked about he got married, he does his stuff. He's also trying to kind of network, and I thought it was interesting on this episode that we've got connections between Van Morrison and the band that we'll come on to. And there's also connections between Van Morrison and Martin Scorsese, who has a connection to Bobby Robertson, correct? So I think this is probably the first episode that things have started to maybe overlap a little bit, but they were all in Woodstock at the time, the band and Van Morrison. So although they weren't pals in inverted commas, but they did hang out quite a lot, and they did quite a lot of jamming and stuff. So it wasn't beyond a bit of man that they've ended up actually doing something together at that point, because they were quite close. And then some seminal albums all kind of came out at the same time. So
and they also did 4% pantomime as well afterwards, which I love.
That's the next band album, is that right? Is it 70 or 71 or something?
Stage Fright, maybe. I'm not sure.
So there's all that going on. His influence is huge. And he does have this thing. I remember talking to David Ross about him, and he said, it's one of these you need to separate out the art from the artist.
Oh, because he is a fucking tube.
It's a knob, isn't it?
Yeah, I played a guy on my radio show recently, a guy called Clive Culbertson. And Clive was the bass player for Van for a number of years. And I got talking to Clive about Van, and it was quite illuminating. He obviously rates him very highly as a musician, but I think he's quite a challenging person. And I think
he seems difficult, doesn't he?
I think that's me being gracious about him, because by all other accounts, he seems to be a fucking scudbook.
Yeah, that's probably a nice.
I think that's why I've never really listened to his music. Brown Eyed Girl, plus what you hear about him, I've just steered completely away from it. So this is the first time I've ever listened to a Van Morrison album.
Definitely my favourite Van Morrison album, and George is right, Moondance is really good, but I think there's just something quite special about this. I'm not a great fan of this type of rambling type of songs, but there's something about the mood of it that's really enjoyable. I did going back to the whole Bitches Brew stuff and that kind of freeform, and I did see some of the quotes where he brought the musicians in and in effect just said to them, I think the drummer actually said, "What do you want us to play?" And he said, "Just play whatever you want."
Just play whatever you want.
And that was unheard of in the rock sort of world at that time. It was all pretty tight and stuff,
Well, John talked about the flute playing that he hated. You can't even pin that down to any person in particular, because the flautist has never been revealed. The identity of the flautist, it's unknown. So they've checked back on the sessions and stuff, and they still don't know who played that flute. So
but we know why, right? Because if people knew, they would chase him down the street and toe him in the balls.
Everybody else on the album is credited, except the flute player. They can't find out who the flute player was, the flautist is.
Indeed. So 47 minutes long, which I think is a bit of a sweet spot in that kind of area for us. 63% Twitter were yes. What else have I got? We talked about influences, absolutely. Springsteen, Bono, Damien Rice, Paolo Nutini, big fan. Joan Armatrading, Elvis Costello, huge fan. So, I don't think you can ignore all of that, as well as the kind of actual record itself and how good that was. a couple of things to finish. It was voted in 2009, I think it was, the best Irish album ever. So, want to have a pop at 2 and 3 for me?
The Joshua Tree.
Acton Baby, sorry.
Really?
Pretty close.
Okay.
3's a live album, if that helps.
Live and Dangerous.
Live and Dangerous.
No, but that can't be an Irish album because there's an American on it, and there's
Scott.
Two Scots
on
it.
Yeah.
Mitch Ure and Brian Robertson.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure if you saw the top 10 or 20 albums, there would be a few artists in there you could say similar.
Absolutely. But
sure.
yeah, so it's revered in many ways, and I guess it's for us to decide whether it goes in or not. So I will go back to John first. John, what's your take, mate? In or out?
So yeah, I would have said 100% out before I'd listened to it, but I'm now 60% out. So it's still an out, but
See,
I think it's a fair achievement that it's made an impression of sorts on me.
So if we ask you
in a
next
positive
week,
way.
If we ask you next week, would it be like 51% in possibly, or no? Right. Okay. No. I won't ask you next week then, George.
Oh, it's definitely in for me. I've got to put it in. I think it's a cracking album, and it still sounds pretty fresh, 50 odd years later.
Yeah, I would absolutely put it in. I'm by no means a Van Morrison fan per se, but I think this music's amazing, and I think the legacy part of it as well is sort of fairly important, and we have talked quite a lot about that. So Stephen's not here to vote. I guess he's got his veto, and so's Lisa, so no doubt we can come back to that. But at the moment it's in. The only PS that had all of that was talk about, what goes around comes around, and I read that he lives down in Dalkey now, just south of Dublin. And he widened his driveway on his house without planning permission, and the neighbours objected to it, and he was made to reinstate his drive back to the original size. And I think it ended up at the European Court of Justice or wherever. You can imagine Van, he wouldn't let it go, right? So it literally went up every level, and he lost at every level. So.
Well, he didn't. He was a big fan of Brexit, so if it went to the European courts, they would have been like, "Oh, fine, yeah, I remember you."
Yeah, I remember you, mate. Yeah, you.
Too late to stop now.
So Van's in. Ashel Weeks is in. So number 59 was Stevie Wonder, Talking Book, which I think is her first Wonder record. Okay, so Rolling Stone says, "I don't think you know where I'm coming from." Wonder warned Motown executives in 1971. "I don't think you can understand it. Indeed, the two albums Wonder released in 1972, Music on My Mind and Talking Book, rewrote the rules of the Motown hit factory. Talking Book was full of introspection and social commentary, with Wonder producing, writing and playing most of the instruments himself. Superstition and You Are the Sunshine of My Life were #1 singles. Big Brother is political consciousness draped in a light melody. Quote, you've killed all our leaders. I don't even have to do nothing to you. You'll cause your own country to fail." So that's the Rolling Stones quote. 59, Stevie Wonder, Talking Book, was released in October 72. We'll go to George this time. Take us away, mate.
By the time this album came out, Stevie Wonder already had 10 years in the charts, and had he not recorded anything after that first 10 years, he would have still been classed as, a legendary performer and musician. But at this point, he's 22 years old, right? So he records this album. He's already had 10 years of hits, and he's still only 22 years old. And this, for me, is his big leap forward. I know he had Music in My Mind earlier the same year, but this is the album that moves him into his first serious adult album, in my opinion. And for certain parts of the album, he brings in people like Jim Gilstrap and Ray Parker Jr., Denise Williams in to help him along. And it's an incredible album. What about the year before? Sly Stone with There's a Riot Going On sort of hints at where socially aware funk is going. But Stevie takes this and goes, I'm no stoned. I'm going to take this and I'm going to continue for the next, I think it's for the next 4 years. He comes up with 3, maybe 4 of the greatest soul albums of any era. He's got 2 killer singles, 2 iconic, everybody knows them singles. You Are the Sunshine of My Life and Superstition, which he originally gave to Jeff Beck. And then it was like, nah, I can't let this one go. It's too fucking good. So Beck plays on the album.
So Beck had the drum line, didn't he? So he actually started the drum line in the studio.
Oh, did he?
That's where it started. And
it was a bit of improv going on.
Correct. And Wonder says, just keep playing it. And he did the overplay on the clarinet and stuff. But part of the deal was, of course, that he'd promised Beck that he would write a song for him. Yeah. So Beck says, I'll have that one. And he says, that's fine. So he goes and records it. And then Motown decide to release it, the Wonder version, because it's so good, and it jumps back and it goes to number 1 and whatever. So,
but it's one of the all-time great. It's soul, it's rock, soul, it's everything. It defies classification, in my opinion. And the rest of the songs in the album, they're really, really fucking good. And it ends with I Believe When I Fall in Love. And he plays every single instrument on that track. He plays everything on it, right? That's how fucking good Stevie Wonder is. He played everything on that. And it's a song, as we're in the sort of film, we're talking about film and television and stuff like that. It ends the album, but it also ends a film and a TV series of the same name. The song ends both a film and a TV series of the same name. Can you tell me which ones?
Which song?
I Believe We'll Fall in Love.
I Will Fall in Love. No, I don't know that. No.
John?
Don't know.
High Fidelity. The Nick Hornby book.
The John Cusack version.
Yeah, John Cusack version, the film version ends with him on that song. And the TV series, which stars Zoe Kravitz, which is fucking excellent. It's really, really good. But they've just moved it. They've just updated it to New York City and made it a bit more modern. It ends with the same song as well.
I didn't know that. I should remember the film version. I don't think I've seen the TV.
The TV version is really,
it's good,
really good. Very good.
So when he did this, you're right, he'd done Music in My Mind, and that was like a sort of line in the sand thing, I think, for him. I'm going to do it my way. It's going to be me playing and producing and all the things. And this was only maybe 6 months after this. It was the same year. Yeah,
he did 2 in the same year. And then the following year, he had a serious car accident he was involved in that left him in a coma, nearly killed him. So in between that, he not only came back, and he came back with Inner Vision. Inner Vision before then, Fulfilling This, first
Final Finale. Yep.
And then Songs in the Key of Life, all within 3 years.
So we've got Talking Book at the moment. We have two more on the list for Wonder to come. So there's 2 of those albums that you've mentioned.
Inner Visions and Songs in the Key of Life will definitely be in there, 100%.
Okay, well, we'll see that when they come up. So this was huge. The 2 number ones, obviously, sort of the jumping off point for it. Number 3 in America on the album chart, never got to number 1, but he did get his first Grammy for Sunshine, which was the year after.
10 years into an already legendary career. Just got his first Grammy for this.
It is incredible. I guess you keep doing stuff, John. George, eventually good things happen to you. But interestingly, once he got the Grammy, he then got 3 Grammys in a row. Not for this, because that was for Best Single, but he was the first guy, and I think the only person to get 3 Albums of the Year in a row for Inner Visions, Finale, and Key of Life. So, he obviously did hit that sweet spot that you mentioned, and
And he's still in his early 20s.
He was, yeah. But some of the guys, I mean, we'll come on to Prince, I'm sure, and he was young when he knocked it out. Most of the Beatles stuff, well, they were pretty young, right? You know, it's you can, you know, that energy can be transferred into kind of genius, can't it?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind Stevie Wonder is the definition of musical genius. There's nobody that sounds like Stevie Wonder. Nobody, his vocal, his harmonica playing, his clavinet, you name it. As soon as Stevie Wonder starts playing something, you know it's him. And that, to me, sets him apart from most.
So, just to throw the stone in the pond here before we bring John in, does he do too much of it? So, I really like Stevie Wonder, right? But I was a bit of a late adopter. Could never quite get him. I think the kind of 80s Wonder always curveballed me a bit, and I've kind of struggled a bit to go back to it. But do you think that this kind of sound it developed, do you think that it became a bit kind of overpowering over the sort of back end? So by the time he gets to Key of Life, which we'll come to, sound wasn't that different really. It was just maybe better songs, but he kind of fell off a cliff really after that. You know, he didn't.
I would say Hotter Than July in 1980 is still a cracking album. That's a cracking album. When you get to the stage, when he gets to doing the soundtrack for The Woman in Red, and he's doing I Just Called to Say I Love You, which is one of my least favourite Stevie Wonder songs, even though it's like technically a good song, the way he works all the months of the year. It's technically great and it's catchy as fuck, but I think he reached a point in his life where it was maybe the passion for it had sort of faded a wee bit and it wasn't as challenged. But you find that with a lot of musicians, they get to a point where they can't all be David Bowie or Prince, where they're constantly changing. They've done their great work by the time they're maybe 30, 31, 32.
Yep, agreed. John, we'll come back to the wash up on that one. What do you think, mate?
Yeah, I really liked this, and you know, probably building some of the stuff George has said. 22-year-old, this was his 15th album. I mean, what is going on, right? But also, you know, that period of time, I think, you know, it was touched on. This was the start of him, you know, really probably branching out on his own and saying, look, more of his stamp rather than perhaps the Berry Gordy influence, you know, Inner Visions, Songs in the Key of Life, all that kind of stuff. But this, I think for Superstition alone, if that was the only song in this album, I'd be voting it in the top 100.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that song is just so fresh and innovative now as it was when it was released. It's fantastic. I think, you know, the use of synthesizers specifically in the album as well was quite, I think, pretty new at the time. You know, in terms of what he was actually.
What do you know about Tonto's expanding headband then?
I have no idea what that is, but come on, tell me.
So
it's a great name for a band, isn't it?
Isn't it just right? So the synth, the main, so he's got the clavinet, but the main synth that they used was, I call it a computer for want of a better word, was this thing that these guys had developed, who he then brought in as kind of co-engineers, inspiration things, and they had this synthesizer that was called Tonto, because I think it was like so big and so mental and stuff, and that they had a band that released a couple of albums called Tonto's Expanding Headband, and the synthesizers, the synth that's on most of the songs on the record, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. But yeah, I just loved it, and I think, funnily enough, this came out just after he'd finished a tour with the Rolling Stones.
Wow. As
well, he'd been touring with the Stones.
Well, Superstition is clearly that vibe, you know, it's clearly a Stonesy vibe.
Yeah.
But some of the songs as well are quite mellow, quite lamentable. You and I think, and you know, Blame It on the Sun, pretty laid back. I think his wife sings is on a couple of tracks as well. In the background.
She co-writes a couple as well, I think.
Right, okay. But a lot of textures going on throughout, and I just think it's fantastic. You know, there's so much going on. I think, you know, even things like the alto sax and Tuesday Heartbreak, just amazing. You know, it's just, there's so much going on. I think that song in particular, when you listen to it, it just reminds me, it just takes me to a place back then where I'd be sitting watching some 70s American cop show, and there's a bit of that music going on, that wow, wow, wow. You know, and you're wow.
Starsky and Hutch.
It's,
right.
yeah, that kind of stuff. It's just drives a bit of nostalgia. And, you know, obviously, I think it was mentioned, Denise Williams, Ray Parker Jr. coming in, Jeff Beck involvement as well. So
is this review based on a
funk?
Is this based on being a Wonder fan, John, or are you saying that you love the record?
I just love the record.
Right. Okay.
You know, I've said it. You know, if you read the Stuart Cosgrove books around about that period of time, you know, he talks about Stevie Wonder, and you know, it's not that type of music's not something that I'm naturally drawn to, but I loved the books, and that then got me into, right, I need to go and listen to this record he's talking about, or this scene and whatnot. So but I completely appreciate it. You know, it's not something I would listen to regularly, but put it on, you'll not get any complaints from me.
No,
you know,
me too, mate.
I really appreciate it, and I think, as I say, there's some belting tracks, no more so than Superstition, which I think is, you know, if you had the top 100 tracks all time, that would be in there for me, no problem.
Yeah, it would be pretty high up as well, I'm guessing. And you know, I'm guessing no Wonder and no Prince. You know, it's that obvious, isn't it? That he kind of created not just a sound, but he created a sort of mindset that you could do everything yourself. When I imagine him being a black artist at the time, that wouldn't have been that easy. I mean, he found it hard in Motown, never mind outside Motown to get that recognition. And interestingly, I know that he thought that the Marvin Gaye album the previous year was the thing that broke the dam on Motown, what's going on, because he did get all the same challenges with getting approval, if you want, for doing that. And I think he also
we're going to be getting back to that album at some point.
Mate, I can guarantee that, quite high up as well. And also, I think because he hit 21, I think his original Motown contract expired.
Yeah.
So he was free to renegotiate and stuff, which probably worked out quite well for him. Couple of things on it. So talked about his Grammys. I knew this, but totally forgot it, that he co-composed Tears of a Clown, which I didn't know, which again would be a reason to put him in anything, I guess, because the song's so good. The other thing I did find, which was quite... Sorry, I had one other thing before I share that, was that he talked about his wife there, Sairita, but they actually got divorced in the summer of 72. So in between them doing Music of My Mind and releasing Talking Book, they got divorced. So although she's on the album and she co-writes 2 or 3 songs, and quite a lot of the songs sound as if they're kind of love songs about someone, so I assume maybe about her, but it's just quite interesting that, you know, when you listen to these records after the piece, whether it's, I call it a breakup album for want of a better word, whether could you listen to them that way? I think initially they sound like love songs, but I'm not sure they are. I think they're kind of like pangs almost of maybe regret and sadness and whatever. But they stayed very close because he produced her album as well. She had a solo album out that year as well, and he also produced that. So talk about a busy boy. And he also produced one of my favourite records, which is, I can't remember the album's name, but it was Minnie Riperton's.
Oh, yes.
Perfect Angel, maybe? Something Angel?
She did with, I think it was the Loving You, the one that Loving You is on,
So I know he produced that maybe a year or two down the road, which I think one of my parents had it or something. I was young, I always loved it. It sounded lovely. So, absolutely, yeah. She lost her early as well. So I don't really have anything negative. I think it's one of the few albums that I'm struggling to find something to go, well, you know, really, would you put that on? So I mean, I'm more than happy to put this on. I think it sounds, even though we'll get more Wonder coming on, I think, you know, this in its own merits just feels like an absolute killer record. So I'm definitely in. George?
Big thumbs up for me.
Big thumbs up, mate. John?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Nothing from Lisa yet. I'm just keep checking in case I'm missing her. But no, not yet. And the only other thing I had, talking about Superstition, just to finish, there's a brilliant live version of it from Sesame Street on 73, I think it might be. Obviously after it came out, so. But he plays it live. It's not like like a pastiche thing. He plays it in Sesame Street studio with the full horns and all that kind of stuff. It's absolutely brilliant.
Wow. Love to see that.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, mate. So as all good things are, right? So so that's a definite yes for us. So that was 58 talking book, 59 talking book. Sorry, 58 is Led Zeppelin Untitled, Led Zeppelin 4, whatever you want to call it. Okay. Then, quote, I put a lot of work into my lyrics, Robert Plant told Rolling Stone in 1975. Not all my stuff is meant to be scrutinised, though. Things like Black Dog are blatant, let's do it in the bath type things. But they make their point just the same, unquote. On their towering entitled fourth album, Led Zeppelin matched the raunch of Black Dog with Plant's most poetic lyrics on the inescapable epic ballad, Stairway to Heaven. While guitarist Jimmy Page veers from the blues apocalypse of When the Levee Breaks to the mandolin-driven Battle of Evermore. Quote, it sounded like a dance around the maypole number, unquote, Page later confessed. So that's Led Zeppelin Untitled, Led Zeppelin 4, released November 1971. John?
Yeah, so again, not a band I'm overly familiar with.
So just remember George's little name check here. It's no pressure, right? George is literally bustling in your hedgerow, okay?
Well, I've no idea what that means. I'm sure he'll come on to explain it, but it's that kind of heavy rock sound that I've always generally steered away from. But
yeah,
but I listened to, I have listened to a little bit of Led Zeppelin back and forth because some of the bands that came after have been influenced by them. So I'm thinking, what's the big deal? Absolutely. Really enjoyed this album. Really quite surprised actually. And when I was listening to the first song, the first track, Black Dog, I was just thinking, this is just going to go one way, and I'm probably not going to enjoy this. But there's a lot going on in the album, really a lot going on, which I liked. The second song in particular, Rock and Roll. The best way I can sum that up would be a primal sex throb of jungle music that may or may not have influenced the career of a certain George Paterson. That's how I view it, right?
Excellent.
So, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
let me get back.
But yeah, there's a lot going on. I think there's a bit of folk, there's a bit of rock, there's a bit of blues. I just thought it was fantastic, and I think as well, if you look back at that period of time, this album was one of the biggest selling albums of all time, or whatever it was, 37 million records.
Yep.
The Beatles and the Stones could not get close to that for album sales.
Yep.
And that, okay, you could maybe argue that they're different animals, and Beatles probably more singles based and all that kind of stuff. Perhaps, I don't know, but and it's all done without any particular fanfare. I don't think there's a lot of publicity about it. I think the only publicity they had was the four symbols, was occasionally in one of the music papers, and that was it. But who would know what it meant? No, not really anybody knew what that meant. And also the cover of the record itself, there's nothing of the band in there. I think they were hugely confident in themselves and what they were doing as a band, that they didn't need any, I don't know if it's gimmicks, but they didn't need any mega promotion or to, stand in the front with your chest open, look at us, we're amazing kind of thing. So I think the music does speak for itself, I think they played in the University of Kent in the run up to this, and I think it was 12 shillings for a ticket, 60 pence, right? And they're blasting it out, and the crowd are all just sitting there cross-legged on the floor, and Robert Plant's basically having to tell them, get up and let's get it rocking a bit, don't be too cool for school. So that was kind of quite interesting about that period of time. But I think a lot of the people that would grow up with this type of band. We're probably too young to catch the Beatles and the Stones, and you know, they're probably taking their influences more from the likes of from Hendrix, you know, maybe Cream, bands like that are, you know, maybe just that little bit later in the scene.
So this was their fourth studio album, I think. So you've obviously got 1, 2, and 3, which pretty much one a year, I think, since the band came together in '68. They don't have another one in the top 100 at the moment. This is the highest one, but they had 5 albums in the top 300. In fact, they had another 3 in the top 150. So as a kind of metal heavy rock band, they're kind of easily standing out from any of the other bands on that kind of recognition thing on the list. So there's a bit of collective love for them out there, but this record in itself seems to kind of you know, be at the top of everyone's thinking when you mention Zep. So
yeah, and I mean, guys like John Bonham, I love the quote he said when he was going through this. So, today I have another chance to do something that I've never done before.
Yeah,
when he was making the record, that, you know, and they were doing some, I think, some innovative techniques in the studio, particularly around these drums. But I love it, you know. And then, you know, what's the song with Sandy Denny that's on it?
Battle of Evermore.
Yeah. So I mean, that gets a tick just because their surname. But
oh, you're so shallow, John. You know.
Oh, I'm all right. But no, I think it's a cracking song. You know, it's quite folky. I love the mandolin in it. I think that's, you know, cracking, better than that flute pish for that last album we were talking about.
So she's the only female ever to sing on a Zeppelin track.
Is that right? Wow. Yeah. And I think the lyrics allude to Lord of the Rings, apparently, which is amazing when you think that the film didn't come out for years.
I nearly spat my wine out there, John.
Sorry.
You're on a roll tonight. Yeah. I read somewhere it was something to do with the Scottish Independence Wars or something, the song.
Is that right?
And do you know anything about that? No.
What, for 2014?
No. It's ahead of its time, you know.
It's very much so, yes. But yeah, as I say, I think it flits between folk and rock quite seamlessly, and it works. And then the last song as well, When the Levee Breaks, which is a cover, understand as well, and that, you know, really, really bluesy, delta ballsy number. I thought it was fantastic. You know, Plant's harmonica on it, especially.
Yeah, me too, mate.
So I went in, and I think halfway through the first song, I thought, I'm not going to like this, but 8 songs later, I've come out on the other side, and I think it's a great album.
That's really interesting, John. So we'll bring George in a second. So obviously the landing for Zepp took a while, as you can imagine, because they were all pretty much not journeymen as such, but they did lots of other things, particularly Page and John Paul Jones. Yeah. But in pretty much, I mean, if I've roll called the stuff they played on, George, I'll let you come in because you probably have to do this, but they were all over that, right? And then obviously Plant was there, but he really wasn't part of that scene. So that was the join, really, where he joined. I think they were trying to get him in the New Yardbirds, I think, if I'm right.
Yeah.
And that didn't quite land, and they ended up being Zepp. But, you know, it wasn't one of these bands that just happened, far from it. So you can see when they actually hit the ground that, you know, they ended up sort of, you know, they knew their chops. It was just getting the songs, really, that made the difference. John, George, what's your take, mate?
I've always liked Led Zepp 3. I always liked the sort of acoustic Gallows Pole and Friends. I always really liked Led Zepp 3 and Led Zepp 4 because of Stairway to Heaven. I always just, fucking here we go again. So again, it's another one of those ones that I had to revisit. And obviously, I've always loved Black Dog, and as John alluded to there, rock and roll is like, you know, you can't help but love it. It's got those great double bass drum, you know, there's so much going on, so much riff. it's one of the most riff-tastic fucking albums you'll ever hear.
Yeah.
But it's not Metallica level screeching on it. It's much more subtle than I remembered it being. It's a lot more restrained, and it's better for it than I remembered. But those first two songs, it starts like a fucking like a jet engine, and it never lets up. You know, you've the first two songs, and then you hit the Battle of Evermore, which is incredible, and then it ends with Stairway to Heaven. You've got to have that's got to be one of the best sides of any rock album in history. It's absolute. There's not a fucking weak note on that entire side.
Yeah.
And Stairway to Heaven it's the first time I'd listened to the song, because it's one of those songs that's been done to death, and you know, you hear it and you instantly turn off because, like me, you're a bit of a snob. And it's so good. It was so beautifully recorded, delivered. It took my breath away when I was listening to it a few nights ago.
What's your take on the copyright debate challenge about Stairway to Heaven?
What was the copyright debate?
So a band called Spirit said that they copied their song Taurus. And
Randy, California, wasn't it?
Randy, California. That's a statement rather than a name, isn't it?
Randy, California.
Yeah, and they had to they're in a whole legal dispute. And normally one of the things to say is, well, you know, I didn't really know them, or you know, if I've heard something, I've heard it, you know, subliminally. But they actually toured with them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they used to open for them and stuff like that. Now, I can't remember. I think it got resolved, I think, out of court. But Zeppelin offered to settle, and they took them to court, and I don't think they got anything like what they wanted. But it's actually the first minute and a half, very, very similar.
Okay. Well,
but the last 6 minutes or so, you know, is absolute unique Zepp.
It's an incredible piece of music. The whole album's an incredible piece of music. You move into the second side, and you've got Misty Mountain Hop, and you know, if you've never entered New York City to the strains of Misty Mountain Hop, then you've never lived.
Yeah.
There's a story about Zeppelin were always very protective of their music and didn't want it used in ads and movies and stuff like that. They were really, really hard on this until Cameron Crowe came along and said, look, you remember me from interviewing you when I was like 15 years old for Rolling Stone magazine, as we're talking about them now.
Yep.
I'm making a movie about those days, and I really need you to let me use a couple of your tunes. And Cameron Crowe showed Plant and Page a rough cut of the movie, and they were like, take what you want, you can have anything you want, you've nailed this. And it's for Almost Famous, it's one of my all-time favourite movies. It's probably the biggest love letter to being in a band and the love we all have for music that you'll ever see.
Yeah.
So it's just this entire album is so good. It's much better than I remembered it being.
I was going to ask you that. So is this so my take on Zeppelin is I don't particularly like Led Zeppelin, and I'm not a big fan of heavy rock per se.
No,
you know.
I don't even class this as heavy rock.
But it is, George. Some of it's brutally heavy, right? And I know that they do the light and shade thing, right? I get that, but there is, if you listen to their LPs, there's a lot of heavy.
I don't think this is a heavy rock album. It doesn't. It's got some really heavy, like bass-driven, bass drum. You know, the bass drum rules the show here. And Bonham is just like a titan sitting and you know, astride the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like, you know, heavy. It didn't feel like Deep Purple or Motorhead. It didn't feel that heavy. It was a lot more subtle.
Because I think a heavy rock album's just going to, you know, it's one thing throughout. This isn't. There's different genres going on here. Different pace. There is nuance. There's real musicianship. So, and it's not to say there's there's not musicianship elsewhere, maybe
no,
not. But
because guys like Deep Purple were like supreme musicians. They were
that's right, yeah.
They were all virtuosos. But this is four guys. Two of them were, as Brian alluded to early on, they were like seasoned session musicians that played on hundreds of hit records, and you two black country like scroats, Plant and John Bonham.
Yeah.
But all four of them together were just, they produced something that they probably never reproduced after this. This was probably the apogee of Led Zeppelin, Led Zepp 4. And I feel absolutely embarrassed to say that I didn't consider it highly enough before. I was too much of a snob to go, it's better than Led Zepp 3 and 2 and 1. This is their best album, easily.
I would absolutely agree with that. I was so pleasantly surprised when I back listened to it. So I did have the caveat saying I'm not the biggest fan. I actually always liked the last album, Through the Outdoor, but I think it might be because I bought it at the time. And side 2 in particular, I think it's fantastic. One of the best sides, almost a good side one of Zepp 4. But the bits in the middle, I just totally passed me by, and I never liked the film that they did.
Song remains the same.
Didn't like it at all. I just thought it was heavy and baggy and didn't like
Indulgent.
it. Yeah, very, very. But I think going back to this, listen to the records, love the folk stuff, love the lighter touches, and some of the playing on it is just wonderful.
Going to California is a great song. It's
wonderful.
Song.
Absolutely wonderful. And Levy Breaks, John, I would concur with that. I didn't know the old cover version, but I mean, it's a Zepp song, isn't it? It's one of these songs that they've taken the source material and it's a Zepp song. I'm sure nobody would argue now because they've made it so good that it's very much theirs.
Rock and Roll also has Ian Stewart playing on it. Ian Stewart, formerly of the Rolling Stones.
He does indeed, yeah.
And he was also Scottish as well. He was from Fife, I believe, Ian Stewart.
Fifer.
Pitt and
Weem, there you go.
Pitt and Weem, we'll take that. So I scribbled down here, Page and Jones either or both sometimes played on I Can't Explain, Baby Please Don't Go, The Who, Goldfinger, Shirley Bassey, Downtown, Petula Clark, Sunshine Superman, Donovan, Release Me, Engelbert Humphrey, I think. The Stones, a couple of Stones albums. John Paul Jones was in The Shadows. Just, I mean, you get through that mid-60s, if you sort of cut through the middle of it, you would see one of the two of them popping up.
Yep.
And pretty much anywhere. So I think to bring that CV into Led Zeppelin, I suppose it was no great surprise. They were probably the culture, and the other guys were the muscle, I guess. As you said earlier, George, they brought that thing. So
they brought the raw sexuality.
They did.
Between Plant and Bonham, it was the power and the sexuality they brought to the band.
And huge influence, massively huge. And I don't like all the bands that, your Deep Purples, I know talk about Rush and stuff, who are massively influenced, but I don't like a lot of them. But you can see how important they were to what they became, which I think is pretty good. I also read, surprisingly, that the Ramones and Joy Division were big fans. And I think it was that power, if I can call it a power trio thing, because obviously Plant doesn't really play so much. So I think it was that side of it that they were kind of very much into. Which I thought was quite interesting. Yeah. What else to get? Bonham obviously didn't last too long. He was 32, I think he was when he last, which was a shame. Just about going tour, and they found him, and he wasn't with us anymore. They did the reunion thing. They've only done one proper gig post that because they pretty much split up after Bonham went. But they played that gig at O2, didn't they? And about 27, 28, something like that. And there was 20 million online ticket.
Yeah, I try to go for tickets myself, but I ended up getting tickets for my daughters to go to the premiere at the Hammersmith Odeon of the movie of the gig.
Oh, and right, yeah.
My two eldest daughters went and they queued outside and got pictures taken with the guys. The band came to the
oh wow.
The showing of it. And
that's brilliant.
With them as well. So
that's wonderful. Yeah. Wow, that's something.
The actual gig, but they were at the premiere of the film.
That's pretty close, right?
That's as good as you're going to get.
Yeah. And the Plant had they all did a bit of heartache. His son died when I think his son was 5. I think they were touring America at the
Robert
time.
Plant, yeah, they were.
Right in the middle of kind of smashing a tour, 77 or something like that, and
Yeah.
they get a message saying his son had died, and
That
they
was
had
it.
cancelled the tour, obviously went back, and they had a couple of years out, didn't they? And
Yeah.
came back, released the album, and then Bonham died, and that was it really. So
That was it,
yeah,
yeah.
wasn't the easiest kind of time. Although that mid 70s thing was there was just imperial, you know, in the market. So 37 million.
But it didn't reach number 1 in America. It was held off the top spot
by
Sly and the Family Stone.
correct.
And Carole King.
And Carole King. I love that. I love the fact that Sly and Carole King. Love that. Because I love them both in equal measures. So
yeah, I mean, I think the thing is with that though as well, there's no singles on this album.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you know, they didn't release singles here, and you know, Carole King as well. Those albums, if you look at it, they were constant sellers, constantly. You know, they didn't peak and drop off as many albums do. They've just consistently sold every single week. People were, through word of mouth or whatever, going out and buying those albums, and that's pretty much why they've stood the test of time as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Yeah, totally agree. And more importantly, the Royal Mail commemorated, I think it was 10 iconic albums in 2010 with their postage stamps, and Zep 4 was one of the album covers that they released.
This
Look at that! You've teed me up, mate. I'm glad I got that right there. So let me see, what's the other ones? What's on that?
I can't see it.
So Let It Bleed, Tubular Bells, a little bit of Tubular, Ziggy, Clash. What's that? It's Coldplay, I think, is it?
Yeah.
Blur.
Blur.
Pink Floyd.
Screamadelica,
and that's Age of Consent. Power, Corruption, and Lies, right?
Yep, New Order. Yep.
Boom. But
there you go.
What is that? Is that an album?
No, that's the Royal Mail thing.
Oh wow!
Oh, you got it. Oh,
yeah,
that's brilliant.
You're talking about it. I've got it.
That's amazing. You think we practice this, wouldn't you? Oh,
yeah, we should.
Love that. Yeah. So brilliant. Twitter were 81% yes. That's one of the highest I think we've ever had. 42 minutes long as well. So in my head as well, you always think like Zepp's a bit sort of heavy and clunky and stuff, but it's not. It's just a great album, you know. So
yeah, it really is. Yeah.
So let's have a quick round on that one, George.
Thumbs up.
Another big thumbs up, John.
It's in for me.
Yeah, totally in for me as well. Yeah, it's the only Zepp we have at the moment, but you know, if there isn't another one, totally deserves its place. My PS to all of that was the only thing I didn't know was that John Bonham was Tony Iommi's best man.
Oh.
And I wouldn't have minded being at that wedding. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the stag, for that matter.
I wouldn't have got around in it or a bank.
Okay, mate. So that was 58. 57, 2 to go, is the band, self-titled, the band. So the band were 4/5 Canadian. Drummer Levin Helm was from Arkansas, but their second album was all American. Guitarist Robbie Robertson's songs vividly evoke the country's pioneer age, Cross the Divide, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, while reflecting the state of the nation in the 1960s. The band's long life on the road resonates in the brawn of Garth Hudson's keyboards and Helm's juke joint attack, but Robertson's stories truly live in Helm's growl, Rick Danko's high tenor, and Richard Manuel's spectral croon. Quote, someone once said he had a tear in his voice. Helm said of Manuel, Richard had one of the richer Texas voices I've ever heard. So that's the Rolling Stone review of 57, the band, which was released in September 69. So we've already had music from the Big Pink on the list, which I think from memory we voted in, I think. And this is their second album, which was their second album. So, John, tell me about the band.
The band, yeah, so I knew we'd had them before, and I couldn't remember if we'd voted them in or not.
Just, I think.
I think 3 different vocalists, isn't there, in the band, which I think is probably quite unusual in many ways.
None of the songwriter.
Yeah, and that's right. So, again, you know, listening to this album, with the benefit of hindsight, you can see where other bands have taken their influences from. You know, we talked about Springsteen earlier, and this has got Springsteen written all over it for me. That Americana feel about it. You know, other artists that have came beyond that. You know, guys like John Cougar Mellencamp. And I think if you listen to Rag Mama Rag, you will hear Kings of Leon let's say borrowing elements of that tune, which you will hear on one of the more well-known tracks of recent times. So they're clearly a band that have had massive influence. And the album itself I think is quite interesting, kind of lyrically, you know, and some of the themes it covers. Again, you know, particularly The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. You know, I was listening to that and I'm kind of thinking, I could totally see Bruce Springsteen just writing down notes and going, "This, I love the formula of what they're singing about," and you know, but that song wasn't without its own controversy as well. Understand that, you know, there was a bit of controversy about people, you know, is it, you know, talking about slavery, but you know, General Lee and the Confederacy and all that sort of stuff. So there was a little bit of controversy there. In the background, but yeah, I don't think it's.
Did you vote the first album on or off, John? Do you remember?
I honestly can't remember.
Right,
George, I can't remember.
George, you'd have voted on, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Thought you would. I think I did. I think I wavered a bit, and I think I voted it on. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I mean, there are some cracking songs in it. As I say, that one I just mentioned, Up in Cripple Creek. You know, the wah-wah pedal and the clavinet, you know, and that just takes me back to the Stevie Wonder that, you know, we're talking about. Yeah, I can just get that. And, you know, there's a bit of yodeling in it as well, which any song that's got yodeling in it will get a massive thumbs up for me. So, you know, if we don't have an album in the top 100 that doesn't feature a bit of yodeling, I'll be very disappointed. And I don't expect Edelweiss will have made the top 100, so we might have to rely on the band for that. And yeah, just
is it a type of music you would be listening to? So that late 60s country folk, country soul, Americana, moving into sort of 70s singer-songwriters. I think I read a review that said that. So my favourite song on it is Whispering Pines.
Yes.
Right, which you talk about voting on Superstition for one track. I would vote this album on for Whispering Pines. And the reviewer was saying, whatever you think of the band, you know, if you put Whispering Pines in, you get Nielsen, you get Randy Newman, you get Chris Christopherson, you just get all these guys. But you're saying with Springsteen there, John, you literally hear these guys going, all right, that's quite interesting. And then sort of, you know, lifting that over and all of a sudden becoming singer-songwriters. So there's some amazing songs on it.
No, there is. And, you know, I talk about the Americana stuff and, you know, picking up on what you're saying about Whispering Pines, I think it's just this, like, crushing ballad. And, you know, it's just if you don't feel emotion when you listen to that song, you know, something seriously going on there if you can't feel that. So that song, 100% agree. You know,
is that the last track on side one? I think
it is.
I remember that.
Yeah. So that's
some way
the last
to finish the side, right?
I know. And then I think the other side starts with Jemima Surrender, and you know, it's got a bit of kind of honky tonk sax going on. And going back to the Springsteen thing, Clarence Clemens would probably be going, yeah, I'm into a bit of that as well. So I enjoyed it. Is it a top 100 album? I'm a bit on the fence with it.
Okay.
If I look at the album in totality, I think side one is particularly strong, and I really got a lot of the songs in there. Side two, I thought was a bit more, a couple of songs that I could easily forget.
Okay.
In the round, but I thought it was a decent album. Top 100, I'm not sure.
So you've got this is September 69. So Music from the Big Pint was a year or so before that. And the Dylan stuff that got released later on, the Basement Tapes, was thick end of a year before that, give or take. So you can see that kind of that journey, if you want, from being a bit Dylan doing their stuff to thinking they want to do it to their own, and then maturing into kind of having their own sound and their own songs and all that stuff. So that's probably taken a couple of years, maybe, in effect, to do that. And they were becoming very influential at that time, partly because I think Dylan obviously had their back, if you want, as an artist, but obviously their first album had landed very well. And I think everyone was quite interested to see what the second album would do. And I think it was also very well received at the time. So I think critically they've always been, probably never sold as many maybe as you think they might have done, but critically they've always been revered, and still are, I think. So we'll maybe come back to that. So this was, so we voted the first one in. This was recorded at, where was it recorded? Was it Sammy Davis's house, I think, in LA?
Sammy Davis Jr.'s,
Yeah, Sammy Davis Jr., thank you. So again, kind of quite different. So I think they're, what are they now? They're West Coast now, aren't they, rather than East Coast for the... So quite a few things changing in their life. So we'll maybe come back to that as well. George, I know you're a band fan, so tell me about the band.
Yeah, you know, you hit upon the fact that they moved coasts for this one. But nothing much changed. It sounds like a continuation of Music for the Big Pink for me. I always listen to those two albums in conjunction with each other. It's I find their output after this more sketchy, but those two albums are, for me, easily top 100. And again, as you know, I've written in my notes there about, Whispering Pines, and as you said yourself, my own feelings were, if it only had Whispering Pines on it, then it makes the top 100, because that is the sound of someone breaking his heart. It's not his, it's Richard Manuel was one of the great unheralded singers of his day. And he was charming, he was handsome, but he was also very tragic. And, within 15 years, 16 years of this, he was dead.
86.
He killed himself. He killed himself in a motel room as the band were trying to get back on the road again post Robbie Robertson. There's a lot of tragedy involved in the band, and a lot of acrimony as well that came after, especially with the ownership of the songs, that Robertson pretty much claimed complete ownership of everything they did, whereas in reality it was, they wrote as a collective and worked as a collective. So I know Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson were bitter enemies until almost the last days of Levon's life, which makes it very sad when you listen back. It adds a lot of weight to a lot of these tunes. But, Whispering Pines and The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down are just phenomenal tunes. And going top, heading off that controversy about Dixie, it's written by, the only American, in the band sings it, but the song was, officially written by Robbie Robertson, who was part Cherokee, half Cherokee himself. So he's given us a history lesson. He's not making any judgment on this. It's a story, and it's so vivid that it feels almost as if he's documenting something real. That's the power of it for me.
Do you prefer the Big Pink to the band, or which is your preference of the two albums?
I'd probably go the band because of Whispering Pines and The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. But there's things like
Unfaithful Servant as well. I think it's wonderful.
King Harvest's on this as well, which is, the big nod to the labour movement in America as well. But, Rag Mama Rab and Up on Cripple Creek, that's the sound of a band fucking enjoying themselves. That's a bunch of guys who are very comfortable in their rootsy skin, just having fun and playing for the love of it. It's anti-rock and roll. It's the opposite of the Rolling Stones and those kind of bands. It's an absolute sonic history lesson. And they, more than any other band collective, invented what we now know as rock Americana. That's the band. So if you like Americana, you like rock Americana, it's those guys. Those guys are the fountainhead of it. And I love the band, and I love all three of the main singers. The voices of all three of them, they're all so individual and so distinctive. Garth Hudson was, they hired Garth Hudson, the keyboard player. They gave him an extra $5 a week when they first hired him, because they basically told his parents he's going to be our music teacher. And he was. He basically taught them everything they knew. And obviously Robbie Robertson was like just this, sonic shaman, just traveling, in and out of genres. And, great friend of Martin Scorsese, they linked up after The Last Waltz and worked together on numerous occasions.
Yeah, did a few film scores and stuff, hasn't he?
Yeah.
For Scorsese, which is quite interesting. So you're right, Robertson became sort of de facto leader of the band, which was like a bit of a rubbing issue internally. But I mean, every band, you think Lennon McCartney, every band's got this thing. It's one of the things that drives them on, isn't it? Is the internal trying to kind of outperform each other. And I think the bit about him owning the songs is an interesting one, because you can't really have, I don't think you could have written those songs in isolation.
No, and nothing he's done since then has touched or reached anywhere near the heights he reached in 1969 and 1970. Those heights he reached with those three voices that he could write with and for, and the bass playing Rick Danko, and the keyboard playing Richard Manuel, and Levon's drums and vocals. My goodness, you couldn't ask for a better, tighter band than those guys.
So it did well at the time. It was number 9 on Billboard in US, which is pretty high actually for a genre that's quite it's quite niche, isn't it? Rag Mama Rag was a single hit in the UK.
It's the only single hit.
Only single hit, number 16. Album review from the time, Robert Christgau, who's a kind of fairly renowned reviewer. He set up the Village Voice and all that stuff in the 70s.
Yeah.
So he said that it was quote unquote better than Abbey Road, which was released 4 days earlier or later, I can't remember, but they came out in the same week, which is quite interesting. So
I disagree with that one.
Well, we might come back to that, I guess. Also, it was called, back to the Beatles link, it was kind of called, the secondary name for it was the Brown Album.
Yeah,
because of the cover. And there's a kind of interesting story. Sorry, you go, mate. You come in.
They look as if they're from a different time. They don't look as if they belong in 1969 with the long hair and the caftans and, the shirts open to they just don't look like that. They look like guys who've just finished a shift at the lumber yard.
They do. And
that's what I love about them.
They look pissed, don't they? And there's a story that the part of the reason they look pissed is, well, obviously it's photographed and it's put in that kind of sepia sort of brown thing, isn't it? But also it was pissing it down.
Yeah,
you can see
it.
And they kept making them redo it, because obviously you've got that flash thing at the time, and I guess it takes a bit. Yeah, it's not like now, right? And I think they were absolutely peeved. It reminded me of I saw a U2 documentary years ago about whatever, they were touring America, I think it was, and they're out doing the photo shoot for the Joshua tree. So I don't know if you remember, they're like in a desert or something, aren't they? That tree somewhere in...
It's a Joshua tree,
Correct, absolutely. And they're standing there, there's like Anton Corbijn, isn't it? It's doing all the photography.
Right,
He's kind of very well-renowned guy from Joy Division and all that stuff. But anyway, he's doing a photo, and they're sort of mic'd up, and they're all standing there, and he's getting them walking around this tree and doing all these poses. And Bono turns to the edge and says, "No wonder we look so fucking miserable on our album covers, because we end up doing this stuff for hours, and it's just shite, isn't it? It's like we just want to play the records and go home again, right?" So I think that the band give you that feel that they are kind of journeymen, and they're kind of, I don't know, men of the people and whatever you want to call that, and that was quite unusual, I think, at the time, where rock stars were kind of rock stars. So there's definitely something different about them. The Dylan thing kind of pervades, because obviously they end up back through the 70s Touring with Dylan again.
Touring with Dylan, Rolling Thunder. Before Rolling Thunder, they did that. Yeah.
And there's a brilliant live album. I know we like name checking stuff that people like to listen to. So the live album they did together, I think about 74 Before the Flood, is a cracking album. So it's double album, and two sides the band and two sides Dylan with the band, if that makes sense. It's really good.
You know, we talked about the music and film here on a number of occasions tonight with a number of these artists, and Levon Helm became a really respected actor.
Yeah, I read about that. Yeah, didn't know that.
Sort of left the band. He played Sissy Spacek's father and coal miner's daughter, because he came from that kind of Arkansas background. But it was also, I think the last movie he was in was a Mark Wahlberg movie called Shooter. It's about this assassination, this sniper who's being framed for the assassination of some political leader, and he goes on the run, and he goes to this old guy's house that he knows can, you know, about certain rifles and stuff like that. And it's a really old fella, and it's Levon Helm. I think it was the last film he was actually in, and he's only in it for about 5, maybe 10 minutes.
Right.
But it's like Oscar-winning stuff. It's outstanding.
And was that quite close to when he passed away then? That was
probably about 3 or 4 years before he died. Maybe about 2 or 3 years before he died.
2012, I think he went.
Yeah,
so,
I went to his barn. I think I talked about that in the last band episode. I went to his barn and just outside of Woodstock, and was given a tour and allowed to play his drum kit, which was thrill of a lifetime for me.
Yeah, I bet it was. You get some pictures?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, magic. Absolutely magic. Okay, so not much to add to that. I think, you know, it was very well received, both critically and commercially. 50th anniversary edition of it came out, when would that be, 4 years ago, roughly? Yep. And it's obviously the same album. It's got some outtakes and stuff, but the interesting part about it is that they have their live set from Woodstock on it. So for that, it's worth a listen, because again, that's a fairly iconic set that they did at the time. So, and it's kind of obviously sounds better because it's on a streaming service and all that kind of stuff. And what was the other thing? So obviously their star kind of waned a bit in the 70s, and they ended up doing The Last Waltz, which is kind of amazing, I think, and it's kind of a whole certainly one of the best set piece live things maybe that was ever made. But the year they decided to do Last Waltz, they actually were opening for ZZ Top.
Really?
Yeah. Which I couldn't believe, if I'm being honest with you. And this is a bit before, you know, mid-80s ZZ Top were, you know, Eliminator and all this stuff. This is when they were kind of coming up.
Lagrange, they did Lagrange out there.
And they were still supporting them. So I think calling it a day was a good shout, you know. So really important band, very influential, and there's been a bit of a thread tonight about that. You talk about that Americana thing, and you're absolutely right, George, but a couple of guys who absolutely name check them are Elton John, his first 2 or 3 albums.
My Father's Gun, you know, My Father's Gun, it's just it's almost like a lift of the night they drove Old Dixie down.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting one I didn't quite connect, which I suppose is kind of mood and stuff, maybe, it was Pink Floyd. Huge fans of them.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it's more about the mood and the kind of atmosphere and whatever you want to call that they created, that they thought was kind of, nobody had really done that before, and they wanted to find a way of doing their own version of that. Yeah.
I wouldn't have got that.
Because we'll come on to a Floyd and they're on a future episode pretty soon. 44 minutes, again, absolute sweet spot, 59%. Twitter were yes, so not absolutely slam dunking it, but still all positive. And we voted music for Big Pink in as well. Fairport Convention, George Harrison had a whole bunch of stuff going on when he recorded All Things Must Pass.
Yeah.
And said that the band were pretty much pivotal
you can hear that,
to the sound, George, I'm guessing we're in, mate, are we?
Do thumbs up.
It's a double thumber. Gets in twice. John?
Yeah. I think on balance, I'll vote this one in. I think as I said, I really enjoy the storytelling aspect of the lyrics on this album. There's not many albums do that consistently throughout.
Yep.
I say there are a couple of songs I think don't really hit the mark for me, but I think just in terms of that storytelling piece, plus the wider legacy that they've had, as being probably the first Americana band, certainly that I'm aware of, and the influences that you can see in some pretty top-notch performers since then. I think I'll vote this one in on that basis.
Okay, I'll vote it in as well. This is one of the bands that I went back to as part of doing the podcast, and probably realised that I liked him a lot more than I thought I did. And partly because I heard quite a lot of that. Although I loved The Last Waltz, George, I didn't really like the other 70s stuff that I kind of heard around that time, and I lost a wee bit of interest. I didn't really like Robbie Robertson's solo stuff.
No. The Last Waltz is definitely somewhere. It's a good stepping off point.
Yeah.
If you want to know about the band and it's like a greatest hits, live greatest hits, watch The Last Waltz. It's a great document to say goodbye.
And there's a man who wears a purple jumpsuit in it.
Yeah, he can't do a high kick.
He tries his hardest. He's just his legs are a bit small for it, aren't they?
There's some phenomenal performances
Amazing.
on that movie. Joni Mitchell particularly, with Coyote, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah, Neil Young.
Ronnie Hawkins with Who Do You Love?
So just on that, just to finish then, just again for us and anyone else who's interested, one of the things I did pick up on, so I think I was listening to it on Spotify, and you get like things you might like when it comes up. And there's a podcast which is called The Band A History, and I'm about 4 or 5 episodes into that, and it's just, I guess, a fan talking about the stuff. So he's just done all the Ronnie Hawkins stuff, and then the Hawks to the band, and then the band to touring. Sorry, the Hawks to supporting Dylan, and then Helm leaving the band.
Yeah, went and worked as an oil derrick, didn't he?
He did. So again, I knew some of that, didn't know all of it. It's fascinating. And then they're obviously just about to come out the other side of the Dylan thing and Basement Tapes, and then do their own stuff. So again, if you like podcasts, it's so far it's been really good. So I would give that a listen. Cool. So we're in for that. That's brilliant. One to go, and we'll call it a wrap for tonight. The last one is slightly different. This is from Liz Phair, Exile in Guyville. So, quote, watch how fast they run to the flame, unquote. Liz Phair sang. And true to that promise, her debut double LP set the underground on fire. Phair and co-producer Brad Wood built off the bedroom demo intimacy of Phair's Girly Sound cassette releases, creating a loose response record to the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. Her strikingly frank sex talk caused a media stir unheard of for a lo-fi artist, but it was the caffeinated drive of songs like 6'1" and Never Said, the painterly sonic impression of the piano piece Canary, or the sunset majestic Stratford-on-Guy, and the real hurt and hunger of Fucking Run and Divorce Song that made Exile hit home. So that's my last one tonight. Liz Phair, Exile in Guyville, was released in June 1993. George, take us away, mate, on the last one. Tell us about Liz Phair.
I'm not going to be waxing lyrical too much about this one. I didn't mind it. I don't know much about Liz Phair, to be honest with you. So this was my first experience of her and her music. It never really grabbed me. Lyrically, it was quite interesting, but apart from 6'1" and Never Said, no other song stood out. And for an album that's rated in top 100, by the Rolling Stone magazine, for me it needs to be either a very striking piece of music or a stunning collection of songs, and neither, of those targets were hit for me. I didn't like the sound of her voice to start with. It didn't sound very appealing. I would say that the lyrical content of the songs was intriguing, but there was very, very little about this that would make me think that it was anything more than just a workaday collection of tunes.
So
maybe I missed it completely, but I just didn't feel any real connection to those tunes or to her voice.
So I knew of Liz Phair, but I don't remember listening to this album and it's mid-90s, so I would be in late 20s or something like that, so it would be a bit of a sweet spot for me to be hearing new kind of underground lo-fi type indie artists coming out. And I don't remember this, but when I heard some of the songs, I remembered some of the songs, but I'm pretty sure I didn't hear the album at the time. So she became
2 years later, you get Alanis Morissette. About 18 months, 2 years later, Alanis Morissette comes out with another, big feminist album.
yeah,
Jagged Little Pill, and that is like a monster. That is,
yeah,
and I wasn't on that night when you were talking about Jagged Little Pill, but
yeah.
that's a phenomenal album. Great collection of songs. Really distinctive voice. Everything about it was fantastic. Everything about Liz Phair's Exile from Guyville was just, it didn't hit me, or it didn't grab me anywhere near like Alanis Morissette.
So let me play a little bit of devil's advocate before we kind of rattle through it. So when this record came out, it wasn't meant to be very common as a big record. It was an underground record. She came from that background. She played with a lot of kind of garagey type bands. She had this kind of anger and stuff in her, and the producer guy says, "Look, let's whack some songs down and we'll see how it goes." And the next thing you know, they were putting them together and releasing them as a record. So it wasn't a plan or a package to do this. It just happened. And then it caught a bit of interest and stuff, because quite a lot of the underground scene were kind of coming overground at the time, if that makes sense. So she was part of the kind of grunge sect at the time. Some of that was obviously breaking through. She had some fans and stuff, guys like REM and whatever were bits of fans of her. So she had one or two kind of patrons in the market. But you're right, I think it didn't land or didn't stay. She never had a career after it, really, that you would speak of. But Alanis Morissette, of course, name-checked her because she was only a couple of years away from... And then they ended up touring together a couple of years after that, so...
Nothing about this, apart from those two songs that I mentioned, there was nothing about this that made me think this was anything other than just that. It was all right. It was okay.
Okay,
that's all it felt to me. It didn't feel as if it was, an album that deserved to be ahead of Led Zeppelin 4 or Talking Book.
So I know it's all subjective, but why do you think that is then? Because it was 93, this updated Stones list was 2020, so it's thick end of 30 years after it came out, so it's not that flavour of the month, or, I just wonder...
I don't understand it. I was really trying to rack my brains without reading too much into it. I was like trying to rack my brains as to why this album is clearly so beloved of the Rolling Stone, and I can't work it out. I honestly can't work it out. I can't see anything in it
because the Stone list has got 300 contributors to it, and I know we've picked holes in it, and it's fine. We've all got our view on it, but there's 300 people who, inverted commas, know their music one way or another, and collectively they've stuck this record on, and it's fairly high up the list as well.
Yeah, but
so are we missing something, do you think? Or
possibly, because I felt the same about Lucinda Williams when we heard Lucinda Williams early on. It didn't grab me. It was...
And I was saying to Lisa the other day, the 1 or 2 episodes ago, that I've been listening to the Lucinda Williams album and really like it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I wonder whether it's one of these things we haven't quite been able to get beneath, because we've not the time to get beneath it,
Something has to chime with me when I listen to any kind of music, and it can be any genre. A wee bell has to ring for me, and it doesn't ring with Liz Phair. That's not to say it's a bad album. It's clearly not. The riffs and the lyrics were intriguing, but on a purely instinctive level, did not ring true for me. No, that's not true. Didn't ring true for me. It just didn't ring that bell for me.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I think George mentioned there, he said, it's okay. And that's exactly what I've written down in my notes. It's okay.
Right.
And it is, I think, and picking up on the point you made as well, Brian, I think back in when this came out, this would be the type of music that I would normally listen to in terms of that lo-fi indie stuff. Early 90s, that's the kind of stuff I was listening to quite a lot. But this artist just passed me by. I have to confess, I've never heard of her. So
it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know we don't know everything, but it's not as if it was in the 50s or it was 2 years ago. You know, it is in a time where we're all pretty active and
that's right,
listening to a lot of music, you know.
As I still do now, back then, I was buying a lot of music monthlies or whatever. They would come, with the free CDs and introduce you to a lot of music, reviews, etc., and all that sort of stuff. So I was lapping that stuff up, but this artist just has passed me by. So I was looking at it and going, bit of indie lo-fi, I'm going to enjoy this. And I did, but it was okay. And, we're talking here about, well, what we're missing. So when I'm looking at a lot of these albums, I'm looking for, what's the USP? What makes us stand out from the next one? And there is nothing on this that makes this stand out to go, do you know what? This is far better than anything PJ Harvey was doing at that time, or far better than anything that Courtney Love or Bjork was doing. Perhaps in America, it was a bit of a breakout album in that country, but there's artists that were doing it here. But even Courtney Love, I think, was probably in that scene doing a bit of lo-fi stuff. Probably mainly in bands, maybe because it was a solo artist, they perceive it slightly different. I don't know. A few good songs in it, but enjoyed it. Is it top 100? Absolutely not for me.
So it was album of the year in both Spin magazine and Village Voice, which are both American based, right? But they're pretty big. Village Voice in particular is quite quite influential. So again, you're looking at it and going, wow.
Spin was in the day. It was a very, very influential periodical, but
it was number 19 on the NME's list for that year. No, I know it's 19, but the NME list is a pretty tough list to get on, isn't it? And again, I'm sure, John, you and I would have looked at the NME list and go, what's on there that we've maybe not heard? And so 19, you're thinking, well, must be something in that. And even then, I still don't really remember getting back to it and checking it out from the time. So one of the quotes was that Liz Phair, she's as lyrical as Joni Mitchell and as tough as Chrissie Hynde.
No.
That's one of the quotes from the time. So it was obviously held in very high regard.
No, I would say putting Liz Phair beside Joni Mitchell and Chrissie Hynde's a fucking travesty.
I thought I'd get you on that.
Both of those artists, Chrissie Hynde and Joni Mitchell, are fucking titans of their craft. They've written legendary song after legendary song, turned in great performances for decades. You cannot compare Liz Phair. No disrespect to her. But I'm sure even she wouldn't compare herself to Joni Mitchell and fucking Chrissie Hynde. Seriously.
So
So we Brian,
sorry,
Brian,
John.
Have you got the Bill Wyman quote?
I haven't. No.
But it's not Bill Wyman from the Stones. It's a journalist, Bill Wyman.
Oh, fuck, so it is, yeah. I just realised that.
Give us a quote anyway. Go on then.
He's wrong anyway. He said it was patently one of the strongest rock albums ever made.
Okay.
Sorry.
Fucking hell, right? He's clearly not got much in his record collection then, that's all I'm saying.
I wonder whether Lisa or Stephen would have a view on this. Maybe we needed the five of us on here to kick it about.
I mean, I think it's a good album.
I liked it.
I've got no truck with it. I
genuinely liked it. I thought there's 18 songs on it, which again I'm thinking, even though they're 2-3 minutes some of them, but I just thought again it's probably a 10-11 track album at 40 minutes, not 18 tracks at 55 minutes, which does put me off a bit. But I actually really liked it. There's actually some really nice lo-fi songs kind of right in the middle of it. That almost you miss really, because the start and the end is a bit more rocky. But I heard R.E.M. in it. I definitely heard PJ Harvey. Definitely. Who's that? I made a note actually because I thought, wow, I didn't hear that either. I'll find it. Who else did I hear? St. Vincent, who I like. Fucking Run. I thought it sounds like The Only Ones song. Shatter. I thought it was a lot of Wilco in that. You know, so a lot of bands that I really like. I could pick up elements and stuff that would kind of align to that. I just couldn't quite put it all together. You know.
And I think as well, the album is a song-by-song reply to Exile on Main Street.
Yeah, it's better, isn't it?
You know, clearly.
Fuck me, seriously.
Yeah,
that's what it was. I don't think it wasn't set out to be, but it had a statement to make. It was a sort of female version of Exile, which is pretty laddish, isn't it? To be fair, but yeah, the songs are amazing, right? Amazing.
Exile was my favourite Rolling Stones album by a country mile. It's fucking an awesome piece of work.
Me too, mate.
Well, I'm surprised you never got this album then, given it's
Given Bill Wyman said the rock album he's ever heard. Fuck off, seriously. Sorry, maybe I'm just getting tired now and it's getting
I
late.
know, mate. We're finishing on a challenge, aren't we?
Seriously, don't fucking...
So she finished, so she does it as a riposte. It lands well. It's been recognised a lot. And interestingly, when these Rolling Stone vote things have happened, so I think there's been 3 of them. So the first one, it was voted at 328. The second one, it was voted at 327.
Just moving up.
Yeah, and the third one, 30 years later, it's went up to 56. So that's...
With a bullet.
With a bullet. I'm kind of scratching my head a bit on that. Can't quite work it out. So
maybe I'll return to it. Maybe I'll have another listen at some point, but I've got too much to listen to before I go back to Liz Phair.
No, I'm probably agree with you. Twitter weren't fans on it. I was just going to say to you before we have a wee vote on it, we actually I had a tweet from Liz Phair. So I don't know if she's under a pseudonym or not, because our official Twitter account stopped quite a number of years ago. But the account's from Liz Phair, but it's at a BR, looks like for Bruce 6 Final or something for me. But it does say, I consider it to be the greatest album to ever be released. It's wonderfully written and has some of the most saddest and raw songs ever on it. It's a genius act of feminism.
Great, but if that works for you, great. You know, it really does. And that's the best thing about these discussions we're having. You know, things that I'll love and things that John loves and Lisa and Stephen love.
Yeah,
will not be things that other people are getting. Other people are going to have this is going to resonate with people. You know, obviously it's resonating with hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people around the world. And, you know, I don't want to do Liz Phair a disservice here by dissing it. I can only say how it made me feel. And it made me just feel, yeah, it was all right. Like John felt, yeah, it was okay. But
me too,
I wouldn't have anywhere near the 100 greatest albums of all time. I may have to listen to some more Liz Phair stuff just to see what the fuss is about. But from this, after hearing Stevie Wonder and Led Zeppelin 4,
the band,
the band, I'm like, no, I can't really. It feels really out of place beside those albums.
Okay, well, we've been on a roll tonight. You know, we have been very, very positive. And I think you're right. We've also had our head turned a few times with artists we weren't quite sure about. And, you know, we've sort of voted a few in and stuff. And that's fine, I think. And we've listened to this one. And my guess is we probably won't vote it. And I mentioned the NME list from 93. So I know that, John, you're good at this as well. So top 3 NME albums of the year, 93.
Oh, for God's sake.
Go on.
Neutral.
Is there an R.E.M. album out then?
It's not in the top 3. No. I think you'll get...
U2?
You should get one of them, I think.
U2?
No. So
Nirvana.
3 was Suede.
What about
Suede's debut?
Primal Scream's follow-up to Screamadelica? Give out, but don't...
Not sure. It's not in the list, mate. 2, I don't think you'd have got Boo Radley's. Giant Steps.
Oh, okay.
Which I remember. I was a bit surprised it was number 2. Number 1 was Bjork debut.
Ah, Bjork, yeah. Yeah,
which
Bjork,
I think's
absolutely.
fair enough, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So I guess that's when she was, and obviously Liz was 19 against that, so I guess fair play to her. Okay, cool. I think I probably know where this vote's going, but let's ask anyway for completeness. George?
Nope.
So no. John?
Good album, but not top 100.
Yeah, me too, mate. That's exactly how I'd sum it up. Good album, not top 100. So the last one is a no. So just doing a check back there. So we have Van the Man, Purple Jumpsuit is in, Stevie's in, Liz Zettelin's in, Band's in, and Liz is out. So we're actually 4 out of 5 tonight, which is good. We're getting a bit more popular. So that's 27 out of 45. I make that. So we're probably about 60% now, which is good. We're getting better, guys. So the next 5 that we have, nothing to vote in or out, no vetoes. John, you never vetoed James Brown earlier, mate. So you've come on and quite happy to let that one roll through, yeah?
Oh no, but you said what George said, we would let stuff go and then maybe decide if we're going to do a top.
Yeah, I think
so that veto,
once the 100's done,
that veto's still there.
Yeah.
Still an option.
Right, okay. Right. I think we chatted about that off camera, but I'll take your word for it, okay? I'll take your word for it. So the next 5 we've got are Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. James Brown, Star Time.
Okay.
Jimi Hendrix, Electric Ladyland.
Okay.
David Bowie, Station to Station.
Boo, rubbish.
And Chuck Berry, The Great 28. So if you know any of those albums, you'll probably have guessed there's at least one compilation out of that 5.
Oh, well. It's one I don't need to listen to then.
We'll save, I said at least one.
We'll
save that for another day. We might maybe have a friend come and join us on that one as well for a chat. So that's pretty much what we've got for tonight. Thanks to both of you, because obviously we've been leaning mean tonight, but we've managed to chat quite a lot as usual. And we've put 4 on the list, and they're 4 belters. So thanks very much for that. Anything we've missed, guys? Anything you want to chuck on?
Nope, not from me. Thank you, guys.
But you need to be wearing a purple jumpsuit for the next one, though.
If I had one, mate, I want one, don't I?
I've just been Googling on Amazon. They're available.
And I want to see the kicks as well. I want to see you do the little kicks.
Put my hip out, wouldn't I? I'll take both of those pieces of feedback and reflect on them. Thanks for that. I was meant to mention this earlier. I'll just finish because it's a nice way to finish. We talked about Stevie Wonder's talking book, and the original copies of the album when it came out had a Braille message on the albums, and I had the quote. So the Braille message on it was, "Here is my music. It is all I have to tell you how I feel. Know that your love keeps my love strong, Stevie."
Fantastic.
Which I thought was a nice way to finish. So we'll leave it at that, guys. As ever, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll catch up soon. Okay, take care. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.